So this is one of the first concepts we did of Calliston. Originally it was supposed to be a lava world. This is a factory in the background that I painted up, and Matt Rhodes added the characters in the foreground having a battle. The interior of Calliston, this mine, was supposed to have a lot of lava, element 0. I'm not sure really at this time what it was supposed to be. That object off the left is kind of this observatory point that looked out over the molten lava below it. I kind of wanted this really dusty kind of feeling to it, like an ironworking shop or a metal shop you'd see play in Detroit, one of those old steel mills and so on. So this is one of the level maps we had drawn up. Mike Trotche did this one. The designers talked to us about some of the objects and some of the scenes they want to have happening, the kind of layout, what might make an interesting gameplay. So we'll quickly draw up a level map for the level artist to eventually build into a block level. So these pencil drawings maybe take a few hours, then we'll give it to the level artist and they'll spend a bit more time building a block level. Calliston, at this point, we were thinking we might have to have some tents, some other objects that are strewn around for the miners to use. This is a drawing for just a covered area for crates and so on, a simple shed, uses with fabric and metal. So Calliston, after we come up with the main production painting and the look we're happy with, what we'll do is take the level, break it down, and decide which rooms we want to concept. Maybe out of each area we might do the large hub area, maybe a few rooms and some hallways, so the level artists get an idea of what the look of the area is. This was the hub where you come into the station. It was supposed to have this skylight that looked out into Calliston. The actual mine goes off in the background. This was supposed to have a lot of signage, kind of a real grungy feeling to it, well-worn look to it, and bustling with people, bounty hunters and strangers of all sorts in here. So one of the parts in Calliston we did was the hangar. This is an important area. Actually, we ended up spending a lot of time on hangars, but really, as gameplay goes, you're into the hangar quickly, and then you leave right away. So this is just the elevator. Originally, we were actually going to have the Normandy come in, land on some landing gear, and we're going to exit the Normandy on the ground and go up this elevator. The problem with that being is the Normandy just was so large that the texture wouldn't hold up, so we decided to create this system that actually unloaded you like a modern airplane would. This was a concept for the boss's room. We wanted to have it quite light, a different look, cleaner, so we had a lot of cream colors, a bit of red in there for color. The light, the windows are supposed to open up. You see Calliston in the background, all the volcanoes, the lava, the smoldering kind of sulfur look. This kind of planet had a few variations. We were thinking lava at the beginning, then we saw a lot of that in Star Wars Episode 3, so we meant maybe it has more of a kind of a sulfur feel to it, almost like Yellowstone National Park with the geysers and so on. Still very harsh environment that you wouldn't want to really go out much into. This is a bar area of Calliston, kind of like a Blade Runner feel to it, a lot of signage, some nice deep blues. We're going to have spotlights on the table, girls dancing on there. It's kind of a seedy look, but still clean and you know, not a real trucker place, but something that was interesting to go to for sure. This is just a concept of maybe how the hallways looked, maybe some of the back areas of the actual structure, almost the alleyway, the workings of the base. So this is just a quick concept of that. This was a concept for some towers we were going to put in Calliston. Actually, to be honest, I can't remember what they were for. We did a few variations. They were eventually cut from the game. I think they were just going to be large structures that you could see in a distance, maybe as a guide point as you're driving along with your vehicle, some kind of cooling towers or mining bases that would have these for something or other. Calliston. So some of the stuff we'll decide after coming out with the production paintings is we did a bit of work in SketchUp. This had some pluses and minuses. The good thing was we were able to build a lot of these individual pieces. The bad thing was that the level artists had a hard time deciding what should be built and what should actually be textured, what should be detail meshes. So you can see some of the detailed pillars in the background, the doorway. We actually might take these and say, hey, that's something that's important. We'll make this a detail mesh. That's part of the look of this area. This is a production painting of the interior of the base. This is the actual mining area where at this point I think we were trying to mine element 0. I'm not exactly sure. So they have these large arms dropping the material in there. You kind of walk around through these almost like vats of the material on these catwalks and then be elevated above it. Almost like a modern day production line that makes cars. Everything's moving along, and you're on a separate area where you can walk through it. And we kind of wanted to guide you through with a lot of lights, so you had a feeling that below you was dangerous equipment all the time, and around you was dangerous equipment, so you were just kind of putting these catwalks to stay away from it. So this is the Prothean Tower from Calliston. When we first started working on the game, the Prothean material was just supposed to be a few small pieces of structure in the Citadel. They ended up becoming very important to the entire game, so we really had to look at a way to get the Prothean material across. We looked at a lot of Sid Mead influences. Prothean was going to be very clean and curved. This was a tower that we built in Calliston. It's probably about 15 kilometers tall. You get up to the top of it, take an elevator all the way down to the bottom, and you'd see all these doorways that went up. It was almost like an engine, like valves on there as the pistons went up and down. As the elevator went up and down, these valves would open up. That was the plan for this. This is a SketchUp model of the hub in Calliston. This just shows maybe a quick layout, the lower level on the right, the staircases that go down, and then some of the platforms up to the top. You'd see that center staircase. You would actually walk around there and look down on this courtyard below. This area we ended up cutting the first two areas and probably bring back in downloadable content. It was a really good area. We almost finished it, but it was just too much for the planet at that time. This is another detail of the hub, the main base. We wanted this large structure that went up through the middle that actually went up through the glass. We were going to hang a lot of hoses off there. This was almost like big, large hoses coming down through the base and then going even further down below. The bar and so on is behind it off to the right, and that catwalk goes all around it. So each area, you'd have your bar, your marshal's area, the port would be to the lower right, would all lead into this area. This is a detail, I think, of the bar area. I'm not exactly sure. This is another model done up in SketchUp. You can see they can get quite detailed. Made it a bit harder for the level artist to kind of figure out what he should build and what should be textures. I mean, there's some nice structures in here, so we would take a few of them, add them to the level, and then really work with them. We didn't have enough time to do all of them. We would just run out of time. This is a prototype done up very early for Calliston. Originally it was going to be a lava world. We decided to go away from that and move it more towards this kind of sulfur world of these pools of water, kind of very baked environment, this yellow lighting. This was done up in Epic with the materials, place a character in there. We did this on a few planets. This would give us a really good understanding of what the planet was supposed to be with some textures that we could actually work with. This is another early prototype of the planet, using a lot of those textures, that kind of lighting of the sulfur world. This was coming out of one of the tunnels. We had this long vehicle area. We thought these tunnels were kind of interesting to guide you through some of the areas that lead more into rocks. Those structures in the background are mining tubes, and the structure on the top would be where the people would sat in, operating the mining tubes, send down the drill through those holes, and then bring it back up through those. Again, this is another scene we set up in Unreal. What we would do is take a few of the objects, texture up a bit of the buildings, light it, take a look at it and say, yeah, that's the look we wanted. So this one had a bit of heavier fog to it. We're starting to get some of the structures we want in the background. This kind of framework, almost like a kind of a grid pattern through there. Some of the signage, you can see some of the white paint just to add a bit of interest to those. This was a gatehouse in Calliston. We needed something to make you get out of the vehicle as you drove through these areas. So we built these interesting gatehouses. We kind of put those tubes in there that maybe hold some kind of gases or something. Kind of this nice turquoise light there worked really well with the yellow environment. And there would be these curved doors you would have to open. So you'd have to go in there, have a battle, open a door, drive through, kill whatever you can, and carry on. These are 3 towers that were done for Calliston. They're actually in the Exo 6 demo when you're running up and the hoppers are bouncing around. These are the towers we placed. It has interest to it. We ended up making the tops more of a reflective material, put a cube map on there, add a bit of interest to that. These things were also shrunk down and put into the gatehouse for extra detail. These are the large mining tubes. So that structure that you see there is where the actual people sit in. They operate it from there, and then the drill would actually slide down to that tube, bore through it, and then they'd pull that tube back up. The walkway would go up and go down the tubes. I mean, at this point we're thinking maybe these could be moved around, they'd be easily transported. It would set them down, drill into the ground, and then set the drill in there, and so on. This is a few screen captures of some of the detail meshes we built for this area. I mean, we had pipes going through Calliston. I mean, what's a leveling game without pipes? So the clamps are actually a detail meshes. The pipes, we ended up, originally they were going to be quite rusty, but we actually made them very reflective, like a pipe you'd actually see in the real world. They're usually chrome or covered with something that's quite, keeps corrosion away. This is a bit of a concept painted over one of the block metals. This is a gatehouse, and what we did was just painted in quickly what the gate would look like. We wanted this curved gate, almost like a stainless steel kind of material on there, so it would really draw your eye to it. And then again, lighting underneath just to draw your eye to that. It was easy for the level artist to light. When you put these large pot lights in there, they could easily put lighting in there. It's a bit of an easier system in trying to do. Just the sunlight with bounce lighting is very difficult at this point. These are some captures done of a prototype of what the tubes would look like. Once you went into the top of the mining tunnel, you went down the shaft. So these hoses would probably link up to the surface, maybe tie into the actual command area where they were working on the mines. Then we were thinking about having these sheet metal being laid down, and then always the water. If you ever go into mines, they usually have a lot of water on the ground. Usually the drilling equipment requires water, or it's, hoses will leak and so on. This is also starting to give us a good understanding of how the lighting would be down in here. They placed a character in here just for scale. This is a prototype done up of the caves. We have some of the modules, prefabs we were doing were cave sections. So this guy was just testing out how the floor and walls would actually match up, maybe some of the lighting, make sure all the elements work together so we can kind of link in a whole bunch of sections for gameplay. And as I was saying earlier, Callister went through a lot of changes, so this was another change it went through. Originally it was going to be a lava world, then we went through sulfur, and then what we decided to do was add more color to it. We found out that as we played it more in the older version, it was maybe just too muted for the average player. So we wanted to get some color in the dirt. We ended up adding some kind of a sulfury orange pools, put a more dynamic sky in there. This actual sky was shot in Edmonton. It was a large storm that came through, and we sent somebody out to photograph it really quickly. They had a bit of problems because it was moving so fast it actually kind of blurred a bit, so we had to fix it in Photoshop. But this was pretty well the final look for Callister, and we were quite happy with it. So this is an early production painting for the Citadel. This was the Presidium. This is the main hub in the game. It had a lot of levels in it, a lot of action goes on in here, a lot of communication, people walking around. This is our really utopian world. Very clean in style. This is what we wanted Mass Effect to really look like. A lot of arcs, clean panel lines, water, nice vegetation around there. We looked at influence of Japanese gardens, looked at a lot of Sid Mead stuff, looked at old NASA photos. I mean, if you go on the internet, you can find so many different versions of these ring worlds. So this is our main place of the Citadel. This is where you're going to spend a lot of time. Some of the characters were added by Matt Rhodes later on. So we did a few views of the interior. This is maybe an apartment. We had this large fish tank. Actually, there was a joke running along the level arts that we had to get fish tanks in throughout the Citadel. It was going to be the big thing. We never ended up doing them, but this is one of the ideas for those. And then the cool thing about this one is it looks like a guy's coming home from a hard day's work. He's kissing his wife off to the left, and I'm sure he's looking around wondering, what the hell are all these people doing in my room? So that's supposed to be his car in that little garage off to the left. He flies in, wanders around his apartment. And actually, if you look over to the right, there's two people talking by the window. There's a guy in a long cape. That's one of the concepts that Matt Rose ended up painting over for one of our aliens. He was thinking about using that as the base. We ended up going with a different one, but that's where he got the idea from. So the Citadel was supposed to have numerous areas. One of the areas was the wards. This was more of the city area. It was away from the Presidium and the council chambers. This was actually out on those long blades that fold up. So this is the major city where the average folk kind of hang out. So this concept was actually a tiered look, that they would look out through the glass on the left out to the rest of the city. And those beams are actually supposed to be made from Prothean material. At this point in the game, Prothean material is just a very small part of it. There was just a few structures made out of it, and these beams were some of them. Ended up, we added Prothean material everywhere later on in the game. Another concept for the wards, pretty well, not much to explain here. It's open ceiling. You see off to the left, there's a car park there, and then those were going to be tunnels with the transportation system through there. Maybe a quick way to get you around the level. This one really didn't work too much. It had more of a mall feeling instead of a future world. This is the final concept for the wards. This one is pretty well the way it looks in the game. We just modified some of the beams. There are the floating cars for transportation. There were supposed to be ones all parked along. Again, this kind of tiered system with a lot of plants growing in there to kind of soften up the look. So after we kind of do a few of the early concepts, we start to work with the designers, the writers, start to think about areas you actually have to explore in the area. So the Citadel had the Presidium, which was the main hub. Quite a few rooms. We had bards. We had areas we had to talk to council members. We had a lot of different areas to explore. So this is a quick map done up for, at this point, areas we thought you would walk around in the game. So we would mark the doors off in red. The orange was the walkable area, blue being the water, and then just some simple trees around. This kind of gives us an idea about the size we're looking at, if it's too big, how many bridges we have, and maybe if it is getting too large, how we can cut back in size. This is just taking actually an existing painting of the Citadel and then just turning it vertical and then showing one of the arms from that the ring area where Presidium is, just to one of the support areas. That's probably where the Normandy was going to come into a hangar. This area was done for the Marshal's training ground. This was done in SketchUp, so this is actually a model built in that program. Some of the stuff you can see we use the stairs, and we actually use that base board area around there, which were an interesting feature of this SketchUp model. This is a concept done up for the hangar where the Normandy docks into the Citadel. The one thing about hangars is you spend a lot of time building them. It's a big area, you have a lot of detail you try and put in, but when you're actually playing around in the game, you get in these areas and you usually leave pretty fast. You fly in and you want to get to where you're supposed to be going. You want to get down to the Marshal's training grounds or up to the wards. So it's kind of a balancing act. How much time do you want to spend in here? Because the players aren't going to really look around that much in here. But we ended up really putting a lot of detail in this area and really showcasing it in some of our videos. This is another view of the hangar. Nice thing about this is it shows, if you look in the bottom right, these are these little discs, kind of arms that reach out and grab the ship, kind of support it, kind of suction cup on there. So the ship has no landing gears at all. These come down, grab onto the ship, and that's how it's held in place. So those were actually ended up turning into detail meshes later on. A level artist would send those off to a person. He would detail mesh that all separately and then texture with a separate texture. This is a concept for a room that actually the only part that really remains is the basic room structure and then the control area. This is, when you go up to the Marshal's training ground, you'll go up these flight of stairs and you see this table with all these holograms on it that looks out over this empty room. One of the ideas was to have blocks in these rooms being able to move up and down, and the designers can build walls, ramps, and so on, and stage all these combats in there for you to train up on. We ended up having to cut that because it was a bit ambitious for the amount of time we had left. This is a concept painted over a bit of the block level. The level was actually partially built. We took it in, added some trees. So when you come into the Marshal training ground, this is that foyer, that opening area with all the offices that go up another 10 or 15 stories. This is the hangar. We're starting to block it in now in Max. This is an early area. Probably spent just a couple of weeks, actually not a couple of weeks, actually maybe just a couple of days on this. Block it out, take a look at the size. We have an early model of the Normandy off to the left. So we're starting to kind of get a feel for, is it too big or is it too small? Will stuff fit in, and how much time will be involved to finish this up? This is a block level done up of the Presidium. This is fairly far along. We figured out a lot of stuff. We figured out where you play walk. Some of the views are starting to get blocked in, the bridges. We'll understand where we'll have to put detail meshes, where we'll have to put time in to put textures. The designers will run around this area. Maybe some of the bridges are unnecessary, or maybe we need some more, so here and there. This is a difficult world. We actually had a problem with, we started at the early stage to build some of the rooms at a bit of an angle, but this was causing problems in cinematics, so we had to just tier them up and keep the floors flat. It was causing us a bit of a headache. So this is a block level for the hangar. Again, this has a bit more detail in here. You can see the arms that are holding onto the ship. We've got a rough model put in. That'll get the detail mesh done for that and the texture. But this is a basic idea for what we wanted to achieve, and then we just put a few Normandies in there to make sure we had the size for all the ships in there. This is the model of the Marshal's training ground. So the level artist has started to block in some of the areas. We have the tube for the elevator shaft. He started to put some of the textures on. He has a little character down there to show size. So this is probably only about 10 or 15% done. There's still a long ways to go on this. This is a rough model of the council chambers. This ended up going through quite a bit of change later on. We had this kind of really curved areas, which we started to keep, but we had to modify it a bit, add some staircases and so on, and we ended up changing the color quite a bit in this too. So one thing we did in Mass Effect that we found quite effective was we built these small little areas, put textures on them, lit them, and then used those almost for the concept for the areas. This is one that we did for the Presidium. Some of those are placeable models, the couch, just put a character in there, texture it up, put some vegetation in, and kind of light it to what we want the rest of the Presidium to look like. This helped us out a great deal in trying to tackle such a large area. This is another one of those test areas for the Citadel. He's just got a character in there, got some of the wall textures, how the plants would look, how the shadowing of the trees on the ground would help break it up. These are just some of the things that we're looking for to help us out with the entire area. This is a detail mesh for the door. It's just a test level too. So this is the door you'll see in the Citadel. It's a separate model. Doors are always a pain in games. It's endless amount of bugs for them for some reason. All the games I've worked on, doors have always been a hassle, and this was no different. So after we built the Normandy looked great. It was an amazing ship. It had a large texture, but even still, we had to build it so big to make it look like it could hold all the people all the crew that actually flew that. Then when we parked the ship on there and there's a ramp that went up right to the door, the texture just wouldn't hold up. So one thing we decided to do was almost build this structure that would actually lower down and attach the ship, almost like a modern airport is now. When you fly up in your jet, these structures come out, hook up onto there. I think they're called gateways or something. So this was our version of it. It would keep you far enough away from the ship that you could still see it, but you couldn't get too close to see that the texture wasn't going to be able to hold up to some of the other buildings in the game. This is the actual detail mesh for the structure that holds the ship. This has been textured up, the detail mesh is complete, and this is in the final game. When we went through the levels, we would figure out which ones of these were going to be detail meshes, and so these are spread out through all the game. These are actually used throughout the hangars. This is the council chambers. This is an early version of it. This is a large, kind of football-shaped room. This is a lower area you could run down, have some lights, kind of loosely based this on a building in Spain. This ended up getting modified quite a bit. This is quite different than what you actually see in the game. This is one of the rooms in the Citadel. This is in the Presidium area. This is a good area for the level artist built this, textured it up, gets a good idea about the lighting and how he wants to maybe use some of these elements in different rooms. Since there's so many areas to kind of build, you kind of take some of the elements you like in certain rooms and make new rooms out of them. Table and chairs are placeables. Those are built by somebody else and then placed in there by the designer or the level artist. I think these ones here were placed in by the level artist. So this is an early version of the council chambers. The modeling is pretty well final. The trees went through a bit of modification, but we actually changed the lighting in this quite a lot. We found out that this was getting quite washed out, so we ended up darkening it up quite a bit, putting a bit of rose color in the lighting, and it ended up looking quite good. Near the end of the game, you get to the outside of the ship. We talked about this a long time ago when we were first coming up with ideas for the game. We wanted to walk on the outside of the tower and you would see all the city above you. I remember talking about it and hoping that we never actually had to achieve it because it was going to be really tough to do. I was just worried about it. But it actually turned out to be not as difficult as we thought, and it turned out to look amazing. I mean, this is a great area. And this is actually, when you get down in the trench, there's the elevator on the left. The original plan was to have the elevator and then all the guests standing on the floor, which would actually look like they were sideways because you're walking up the side of the building. And when you come out, we had all the rubble coming down and the whole city view, which looked amazing. This is pretty well close to the final look for the marshals area. This is that tube where you take the elevator down. The windows we ended up modifying a bit and then just darkening it up a bit, and that was pretty well the final look for that. So in the early stage of the game, there's a lot of thinking to do about what you want the story to be, how you want gameplay to work, a lot of unknowns. So what we'll actually do as concept artists is just start painting up ideas. This is a city we had. This is actually part of a structure in the Citadel. This is below the wards. This is a real deep down area in the station. This is actually going to hold the outer protective skin to the main part of the station. That's what those large beams are off to the left. Maybe some control area or magnetic field that helps support it. These almost maybe 10, 15 story trenches on either side. So you're supposed to walk around here. There'd be people living down here, like markets, real kind of back alley feeling to it, kind of built out of rough structures they would find, leftover steel. Some of the lower class people would dwell down here. This is just a city concepted, some ideas trying to throw them out, get them down in Photoshop, just so we can kind of keep track of them. This wasn't any specific planet at all, it was just what would a city look like in Mass Effect, and then get some ideas off some of the things that we did with it. This is another city idea, probably on a planet, just maybe trying to get some of the structures, maybe how the curved base of the buildings are. You see the middle part to the lower right. Maybe a landing area for cars where people could get off, go into the rest of the level. These cars floating along would maybe go through a section in the middle, maybe some kind of tunnels. Just getting ideas down, maybe seeing what people like. This is a very early stage, and some of these we'll keep and we'll just get into the main part of the base. This was actually some concepts for some of these tunnels that went through. Maybe some air ducts, really support areas, a lot of hosing, piping, almost like subway tunnels, maybe some structure in the middle where people can get up and then go up to the higher part. Again, just getting some ideas down. Maybe that wall pattern was almost these concrete shapes that were bolted in. They do a lot of that with subways. This is another city idea, just painting it up, throwing it in combat, see what people think. We ended up not using this one. Maybe we'll use it in the future, but just some narrow street in the city, offices or whatever, then going down the street below. This is another concept, maybe this, I think we even thought about this for part of the Citadel, like how would that city actually look? Maybe off to the left, it's a real kind of structures. They would prefab these things up and stack them on top of each other, maybe turn them around. This area off to the right was more of a nightclub. You could see the cars in there with the chauffeurs around. They would fly in, drop off the people, and wait for them to finish with the nightclub. Another attempt at a city, maybe a lost city. These people maybe just built giant skyscrapers on some kind of planet, painting them up, just thinking of some ideas for if we can get something out of it or use it. This concept, we actually started to modify this a bit to become Warworld. These are actually these tall skyscrapers that are really thin. They're just like blades almost, but 400 or 500 stories high. You can see all the windows in there, maybe some of the ships. Those were going to be 2 ships off to the top right would connect to the top. Very misty, foggy world, which he ended up using a bit for Warworld. It was going to be these tall skyscrapers on that one where you'd never see the ground. And just another city, playing around with maybe these kind of a large wall with these holes punched into it where the windows would be. Maybe on the terrain they've carved down deep into the ground where the city would be, maybe some kind of hidden, maybe there'd be spaceports down there. Again, fast concepts done up and see what people think of them. This is kind of a detail done up of that city I mentioned a couple ago with the large, very thin buildings that were 400 or 500 stories high. This is more of a detail about where maybe some of the ships would come into a dock. Those 2 holes on the left where you kind of see the one ship, they would pull in their dock, drop off the cargo. You can see some of the towers going off further to the right with a lot of other ships kind of floating around. Kind of the sunset feeling to this planet. This last one here is just a hallway concept done up for the Citadel. This is, again, very early on. Just some benches in there, maybe kind of getting some ideas of how the walls would look, how these plates would kind of form in there so the level artists could build them. You kind of see that one with the writing on there. Maybe these kind of stuck out from the wall with lighting behind there. Just kind of figure out how maybe hoses kind of were always hanging down or some of the detail. Maybe the floor was always shiny, very polished look to a metal or marble. Just kind of exploring some of these ideas to maybe see if we could use them later on. This is a concept we did up for Eden Prime. At this point, we were thinking it was a farm world, these rolling hills, almost like the countryside of England. Maybe hedges, these large oak trees. So it's a very agricultural area. This concept was done up, you can see the towers, some bridge structures. Maybe these would be structures that they would take the crops on these trains, bring up these towers, the ships would dock up with them. Eden Prime was a planet under attack. It was almost like the beginning of D-Day when they were storming across Europe, across the fields. That was supposed to be the look for this. Eden Prime went through a lot of changes, just like a lot of our other worlds. A lot of it you just have in concept, so it's not much of a change. Other ones you get as far as actually building a level before you make changes. Other ones you built the whole thing and then you just try and fix it with lighting changes. So when we start to get the map down and talk with the designers and the writers, we have an idea of what they want to happen. At this point, Eden Prime, you were actually supposed to land the Normandy, you see where the one is, walk up through the areas, have some encounters, and then look over these giant crop fields. That's the kind of beige area. And then there was supposed to be a big trench, a meteorite trench, where the Prothean ruin kind of plowed through, and then the camp was in 4 and 6. And you would actually go down in this trench. We modified that quite a bit just to look more like a dig site. This is another map of the same area, just changing around the views, maybe to help out with streaming load. You kind of want to get the character moving around so you can actually stream in separate parts of the level without them seeing. This is the second part of Eden Prime. You're actually supposed to go through cross a river, up around some turrets, and then go through these giant crop fields of wheat or whatever kind of crop that they grew on this planet. And then we had these floating crop beds. Then you get up to 7, up to the station, and take the train all the way to the end of the level. These were some early concepts for some structures on the level. The top one was supposed to be maybe these tubes that they had built. Maybe even the whole planet was more of a metal man-made planet, and the grass and crops were just put on top. That's some of the ideas you throw around at the beginning before people tell you that it's crazy. So that was a tunnel that maybe you went into. The lower structure was maybe some kind of pumping station, some kind of other structure that would help out with the crop beds. So you always need something that people can go in and turn switches. So those were early phases of these. This is an idea for some floating crop beds. They would fly along over top of the planet. They had crops on them, or maybe they didn't have crops. Maybe they were full of dirt that would just move around. They're going to be kind of fun because at one point you were supposed to go in and turn them off, and it would crush the enemies below, or you'd be able to start them up and they'd mow across them. You'd run around them for combat, just for cover. We ended up having to cut these. They just didn't work. On Eden Prime, you had these large towers. This is an original concept for those. It's just way too much. All the extra fins and stuff. Once we remove those, you pretty well have the final concept for what we went with. We needed some kind of large man-made structure on this planet to make it feel science fiction. So this is, we're starting to block in the level. We're getting some of the walkable areas, a rough feel for the size. One thing we noticed after building this, it was just quite big. We were going to have to spend a lot of time building and detailing that station. So we ended up modifying that, moving the tower further away so we didn't have to worry about all that. It's just going to be a lot of detail meshes and worry about how it would hold up when you got close. You can see those gray squares off to the right. Those were just some temp versions of those floating crop beds. This is another view of the same area. You can actually see where you walk through. You're going to go through all the trees for cover. There'd be crop areas. And then the gray structures off on the right, those were just quick models done up of some of those other buildings that were concepted. And then the large towers be in the background. Those are just temporary turrets in the lower left. So Eden Prime was one of the areas we built first. We knew it was going to be a showcase area. We were going to show it a lot. So we put the most time into it. This is an early version of Eden Prime. We have a large structure. This is a ramp. I'm not even sure to drive your rover up there. You can see the tower in the background, some early looks at what the vegetation would be, maybe even kind of what we were thinking the color would be. We were thinking about almost like early morning, maybe mist on the ground. And as you can tell from the final game, that changed quite a bit. These were some other test areas, maybe how rocks would look, some of the trees. This is just another test area, maybe looking at how the plants, you maybe put some white flowers in there, how the texture would work with the rocks. Maybe some static mesh would be where those cliffs are. Those would be all detailed up, how we'd place them and blend them in. Just trying to figure out how we would actually attempt to build this world. You can see some of the hills in the background. Those are pretty well just rolling areas with a large texture on them. So after deciding that we were going to move the tower further away, we still needed an area for you to get up onto the train. This was some early versions with SketchUp about how these trains would get loaded up. You can actually see the platform moving up to where the train is. These are pretty ambitious. We had to really modify this quite a bit to make it work in the game. This is another view of the train. This is the bottom of it, so we actually didn't build a lot of this detail because you never see it in the game. It's another quick SketchUp view of the train. We ended up using the top of it. We just widened it up for combat. It was just too narrow, and then simplified up the bottom of it. And this is another view of the train. Again, we just modified the top, kept it simple, added a bunch on there, put some cover in there. Problem with this one is there isn't really a place for you to hide behind, so we had to build these structures so you could run, take cover, shoot the enemy, and keep moving. This is a concept done up of the rails, how this vehicle would move along. Originally, we were actually going to have a combat on the top of the train. You were going to get on it, move along in this train, shoot people on the side, but we were having problems with, you throw the grenade, and now that the train's moving, the grenade was moving at the same speed as when you were just standing on flat ground, so obviously it's not going to be moving as fast, and we're having other issues with people falling off the train all the time, so we just ended up turning that into a quick cinematic. This is a concept done up in SketchUp of the station. Some of these structures we ended up using, we simplified it up a bit. We didn't put the beams across the station. We ended up using those X-shaped beams on the sides. Those were a big part of the station. This is another model done up of the station. This is the final part where you get off and then have the big fight over the Prothean ruin at the beginning of the game. Again, we just modified this a bit from the actual SketchUp model. Again, we're moving the beams to simplify it up. This is just another SketchUp view of the train station. Another view of the station, just showing some of the platforms, maybe some of the areas you'd actually fight down in the lower center and then lower left of the painting here. Another view of the station. So this is pretty well what we thought was going to be the final version of Eden Prime. We had the towers in, we had some nice kind of seeds floating around, we had the water, everything looked amazing. We thought, this is done. We had this beautiful sky in there, and then we started to get feedback that people just didn't feel connected to it. It just didn't have the feeling like this had been beaten up, like you were in a war area. We needed some more emotional impact, like some homeworld was completely obliterated. Because you get down here, you find out there was a battle, and you go, well, this doesn't look so bad. Well, what's to be concerned about this? We'll just patch it up and it's good to go. This is another view of that early world. Nice sun, some of the towers that the train tracks across there, some of the vegetation. And then we did a concept to give it more impact. So this is Eden Prime after it was beat up. This is the Geth coming down and just letting it have it. So we had these spikes, we had these people impaled on them, we had our deep red sky, the towers are burnt all to heck, the ground is all scorched. So this is the changes we decided to do to Eden Prime. So this is pretty well the final look for Eden Prime with the red clouds, burnt out towers. You see the spikes down there. We had embers floating in the air, just to make it feel like this world had been completely wiped out without it being just this baked glass rock. I mean, there's still life left in it. This is the final area where some of the towers are, that scorch mark where Sovereign drops down, and this is the way Eden Prime looks now. So when we were concepting up this planet, it was called War World at this time. World at war, completely demolished. War had raged here for hundreds of years. Not much left of the structures. We were thinking of large towers. We didn't want to do ground at this point. We wanted to have all the fighting done up on the floors of the buildings, maybe connected by some kind of trains or a highway system. So this is a concept done up. The guy's just standing here on one of these blown out floors. There's not much left in here. Everything's been burnt away. It's just mostly concrete and steel. That's the only thing that has survived this long. Then there'd be all these firefights between the towers, and you'd have to work your way across to those different areas. This is another concept done up with that. Again, the towers, bottomless pit below. These things are 400, 500, 600 stories high. Maybe some of the walls have fallen over to the next structure. That's how they get across. Just this war, endless war going on in here, like Stalingrad, but very vertical. After we do the production painting, we'll do some quick kind of drawings of maybe how to build a block level. We'll spend a few days on the block level, talk to the designers, make some changes, and then spend another week just detailing up that block level a bit more. And then we'll do a big phase 3, we call it, where we'll texture it up, do some rough lighting, and then phase 4 is the final phase where we just put all the polish in, where we get the detail meshes in, we do final character lighting, make sure all the textures are correct, and just keep polishing as much as we can. This is an area done up for actually the vehicle level where you're driving around on the highways and then you go into the inside of the buildings. It was going to be like subway stations. You would drive in, there'd be staircases going around, you'd be driving in on the loading platforms for those. This is a SketchUp version of, with a bit of the production painting in the background of what the towers would look like. We weren't too sure what the actual structures were going to look like, so we got a concept artist to kind of give us a rough idea how some of the large beams would look, maybe some of how the floors would kind of fit in. That structure in the middle, you can kind of see that hole, that's where the hangar was going to be. The Normandy flew into this, that had some shielding that had been put up by the colonists there, the mercenaries, whoever was in these bases at the time. So they would build these structures, they'd probably get demolished, they'd have to keep rebuilding them all the time. This is the camp that was done on Pharos when you're coming in the level and then you go to the main camp after the hangar. This is an early concept done up for that. At this time we were thinking the designers wanted another building where the Geth would always snipe at them. So you'd have to go up these platforms, shoot the sniper, and carry on through the level. That got modified a bit, but that's what those shields were for. And then at this stage, we were thinking of having a large freighter with a cockpit, and it was stationary there. It would power the whole area of this hub, this camp. So there'd be cables going up into the cockpit. You can kind of see where that turquoise light is. That's where the cables actually went up into the cockpit of this freighter that would power it. We ended up modifying that a bit and just using some of the sections from the freighter modules that we used on some of the Uncharted worlds. This is another view of that trench. You can see the freighter there, and then across that bridge was going to be where all the Geth were actually shooting at you, and you'd have to get across that bridge, maybe take your rover through there, and you see how all the floors crumble already beneath you. There'd be a large crane that was going to lift up that section of the freighter so you could actually go down to find a Thorian. So this is kind of like the last hold for the humans that were in this base. This is a SketchUp version of maybe how the floors worked in here. This would be how each level of the buildings would look. Trying to figure out how the staircases would fit in. We want to use the same staircase throughout the game, so it's one instance of that piece. Keep it cheap. And you can see some of the other elements that were used in this model. Maybe how some of the curved sections were, how the floor was done, some ideas for the beams. And then the level artist would look at this and figure out what to try and build, what components he could build the whole level with, and so on. This is a concept done up of the hangar. You would fly in through that hole in the top left, go underneath all these tarps, pull up, and then this platform would connect up to the ship. This is going to be a lot of work, so we ended up actually reusing one of the hangars from, we ended up using the same hangar, I think, from Ice. Used it in Pharos here, Ice being Novaria, and then used it in Pharos. So it would just save us time. We just damaged it a bit, and it was good enough to use. This was some early concepts done up for the Thorian layer. When you get in there and you see the Thorian and you had to work your way up and around. This is some SketchUp models done up of what that interior would look like. The way the beams would look, how that, maybe those are some of the structures that the Thorian would attach onto. So again, these are during early on, and then the level artists would see what you could kind of build and how we'd have to modify it to make it work with gameplay. This is a painting done up with the Thorian in there, so you can actually see him just hanging in there, glowing turquoise, some of the rubble around, just giving us an idea of what we're trying to tackle with this area and what we have in store for us, and it was a lot of work. I mean, Warworld was tough. It was not an easy area to build by any means. Again, this is some concepts, maybe exploring how some of the doorways looked. We ended up simplifying a lot of this, putting less rubble, more just kind of doing it with a texture of just a kind of a dirty floor, just some cables, some fires around it to kind of guide you through these areas. If you got lost or couldn't find the door, we'd always put a fire or some kind of a light, maybe in the ceiling, punch a hole through the wall, just bringing in some light to help out the artists. It's hard to light some of these areas, so the more kind of natural light you can bring in, or artificial light just to make it easier so you can actually see the source, can really help out. So we did a few versions of Warworld in SketchUp. Eventually what we did was we gave this to an artist. He built this little area of the level. He textured it up, lit it, and we decided to go with this kind of look for the whole area. You can see some of the textures that are in the final game, some of the punched out walls. At this point we were actually going to go with this kind of mustard lighting, which we modified a bit to be more blue because it worked better with the orange fires, but this actually helped us out quite a bit. Again, this is another section of the building that he detailed up, showing some of the floors, some of the structures, and we're going to take those and take them throughout the whole level. This is a rough version of where the Thorian is. You can actually, he's that guy in the middle. He's just placed in by the level artist now, just a quick block. And this shows how the level was going to work, how you worked your way up around. This would help us out to where the arms actually attached, if the designers were happy at this place, because we'd actually have to build everything around those arms. We didn't want to have to move them that much because it was going to be a pain. This is an early block model done up of the vehicle level. You can actually see that I had a concept done up of the area where the vehicle drove in, almost like the loading area for a subway. That's in the center there. You can actually see some of those sections. And then some of the walkways up on the right with some of the staircases, and then the bridges were off on the right, going off the next skyscraper. That kind of area in the bottom is where the water was going to be. That's actually in the final game. This is fairly early on in when you get out of the hangar, you go up to the mercenary camp. You can actually see those the checkered area of some of the freighter sections that we placed in there. We didn't use the actual freighter model that we were originally going to use. And then we ended up, you see how we had a lot of the top of the area kind of covered up. We ended up pushing that back, so bringing more of the sky in this area. It was going to be a lot of platforms above rubble ground and really going to be a lot of work. So we ended up having to modify this quite a bit. This is just an outside view of that area. You can actually see between some of those beams. Those are some of the curved structures that were supposed to protect you from the snipers. We removed some of those, well, just modified them a bit. We actually didn't remove them. Modified some of the beams, moved back some of the ceiling and so on. This is another quick view in Max. This is the level artist building it. He's starting to detail up areas, figuring out how streaming load works, a lot of issues to consider. This is the vehicle level. You can see to the bottom right, that's the tunnels you come in on. And then as you drive around, you're coming up to the middle left is one of the hallways you'll drive the vehicle up. This is a model of what we were going to make a detail mesh. We went through in the early phase 3. So fairly early on, we would just build these quick block models. This is one of the support beams in the under part of the bridge. We ended up using it in the beginning of Pharos also. At this point, this is just a quick max model, and then we were going to make this a detail mesh. So it'd get its own material, its own normal map. So this is just a version of what these things would look like that we would call detail mesh. Other people call them hero pieces. So this is just a rough outlay of what that is. This is some textures we did up for the road, some of the cracked pavement, because we actually didn't want to try and build all these small pieces of rubble. So this is just the textured version of that. There's probably one texture with a couple of other textures over top of it. Those are kind of put on as masks overlaid on top of it, just to kind of break up the actual texture itself. So instead of like taking one large concrete texture, then you take this other texture, lay it on top to kind of put these blast marks or damaged floors. That way you have more control over where you put them. It breaks up the tiling of the texture. This is a view of the vehicle level. You can see the bridge kind of moving up. We needed a way to actually get height up because the one level was quite a bit higher than the next, so we couldn't have a flat bridge. We needed to get up a few stories. So what we decided to do was have the bridge look like it would collapse down onto the lower one. You would drive your vehicle up on this, then you'd look out over the clouds, you'd see all these skyscrapers on fire. So it was going to be a pretty cool area. We were still keeping that kind of mustard color, almost like a sunset feeling to this area, which we modified later. This is a close-up of one of the areas. When you get near the end of Pharos, you'll see the Geth transport stuck on the outside of the building. This is the ship that powers the force fields, which you have to knock down. This is a view of the towers. The level artist kind of placed a few around, put some fires in there just to kind of get a feel for what the look was going to be like. This is parts of the detail mesh. The guy would build these buildings separately, give them to the level artist, and we would modify them and make them work in the area. This is one of the rooms that you would walk through. We have some broken up computers, just a concrete floor. We ended up having to flatten that floor out a bit because you would fall through. I don't know how much. You get to this area where there's a Krogan and talking, and then we'd have some dust effects kind of coming through the ceiling, like rubble kind of falling in above you and so on. So one thing we did partway through this is we decided to just change the lighting a bit, trying to add some more blues, get some more fires in there, add some oranges. So what we did was just did some quick paint overs in Photoshop. Actually took the block level, painted these up. These only took about half an hour. This time we were thinking of using some lighting. Those two beams are on the far left and in the center. Some kind of a lighting that we could place around through the level and then have fires in the background. We ended up not using the lights, but we ended up using the fires. This is the actual level in the game. It's, some of the elements we talked about, the blue lighting, have the fires to light up some of the dark areas, punch some holes in the ceiling to even get some light beams. And this is probably pretty well the final look for the game. The floor is all flat, just one texture and some rubble piles, so it's easy to run around in the area. You don't get stuck on a lot of stuff. And then the Geth claw is that structure in the middle that holds the ship on it. We have to knock it off to get the force field down. This is a look down one of the hallways. One thing we added on this one that helped out War was we added this tinfoil texture on here. This area was actually built as a component which we reused in multiple areas. We actually took some of the walls out that we had earlier in the level, added these sections in. They almost look like open areas of the game where you could look over the side and would drop down a few stories and go up a few stories just to help open up the area. Because before you really felt like you're running around through these closed areas, like just hallways. Now this feels like it's more open to air. It feels like it's a grander look. You can see around, see things. You get skylights to the ceiling and through the sky and so on. So one of the planets we needed to concept up was the Prothean homeworld. This had been pretty well consumed by a jungle. It had been lost for thousands of years. And you would go to this planet to actually go through the archives, figure out a pivotal point of the story, what happened to the Protheans. So some of the stuff we looked at for reference for this was, we actually looked at a few canyons in China, in the province of Hunan. There were actually these large rock structures. We just ended up kind of modifying them to look like skyscrapers. I like the way the trees and all the vegetation grew on them. We didn't want it to be completely consumed by jungle, because there would just be too much vegetation. So we wanted some of the city to actually poke through. So some of the Prothean structures, we were just playing around with a few ideas. The ship was just thrown in there for just a bit of an excitement, focal point in this production painting. This was a quick pencil drawing, colored in with felt marker, just maybe to explore what you would see on the ground. Is it very swampy? How much roots? Is there grass down there? How many leaves? What kind of trees? We looked at some reference from Angkor Wat, this temple in Cambodia. It's actually one of the largest religious monuments in the world. So we looked at the way a lot of the roots grew over the buildings, how maybe the stonework would fall down, and maybe just trying to decide what these Prothean structures look like in the background. This is a map drawn up, just a 2D map. This was given to the level artist. He would build a block level. The numbers on the map represent where events would happen. The designers laid out. Maybe 8 would be an encounter, or 9 where you have to run around a corner to go down the elevator. A little bit of an elevation off to the left about how we would want the player to walk around. Maybe he goes underneath. Maybe it's all covered with water, quite swampy below, and when you get up on top, it's all this dry land. This is a concept done up in SketchUp. This, I think, was the when you come down in the Prothean ruins, you take that elevator down and you talk to the Prothean hologram, that unit down there. This would be the room that we were going to build around it. Quite complicated. We were going to spend a lot of time on it. We ended up simplifying it up quite a bit, adding more roots and vegetation kind of coming in than we're showing in this concept. This is actually an early version of the level built in Max. We actually just modified this a bit and showed it E3, very green. We were playing around with some blue mist, a lot of ferns, very deep jungle feel to it. We were probably even thinking about having rain and a real misty feeling like you're in the deep Amazon, just sweating heat. So this is the direction we were going at that time. This is a concept done up of the actual Prothean pods. This is where the capsules that they were stored in, millions or thousands, however many there were in the ruins, they're all stored and relied on just a few people to take care of them. At this point, these capsules were actually supposed to slide out. Maybe you saw the Protheans in there. You had to do something at this point. We ended up modifying that quite a bit to keep it simpler. As you go into Ilos, you go down to the Prothean archives. We were kind of playing around with an idea of having a lot of unique elements in these areas. The road would really twist and turn, these bridges and maybe some curving elements, these big round doors that would carry you through and lock you out. But as we talked to the designers more, they pretty well just wanted a real long stretch, not much combat in here at all. Actually, there'd be none, and you would just get blocked, talk to the Prothean. It's an emotional part of the story because he tells you really what happens, and they didn't want any kind of combat to distract you from that. So this is just a section of the road we were starting to look at. How are we going to build it? What do we want on the walls? And so on. Again, this is another quick sketch up of how the road might look. Pretty ambitious for what we ended up doing. A lot of unique elements in there, but these nice curved structures off to the right, just exploring what would make this area unique. This is another look at part of the level as you kind of go down in the Prothean areas. Some of these we kind of kept, like as you drive in through the Prothean areas, there's some very tall vertical areas in there. These are some early concepts for that. Part of the problem with this one is maybe the beams as you're driving along, as you start to work your way through this level, would you get your vehicle caught on those? Would it be annoying if you're driving and hammer right into one of those? This is just a quick drawing done up over a block level. This happens a lot when working with levels. The level artists have a lot of responsibility. They get a lot of freedom to design. Some of the levels will just do a few production paintings, some small drawings, and sometimes they'll last for a few more. You don't really have enough time, so you'll actually just take a picture of the block level, paint over some structures in Photoshop. This is just a quick concept for the beginning of Ilos, when the rover actually drops, when you see Saren go through the gate, and you start that level, and you look back towards the enemies. These are some of the structures you would see. This is just a top-down view in Max of the actual level for the trench run. This thing we built really big. We ended up having to cut it back in size, but you can actually see up in the top left is where you start to come down. You work your way down, then to the bottom left, back up to the middle, and then off to the top right is that's the mass relay where you get shot through into the citadel. So these were all components that we built that could be easily moved around. So the designers felt that the original one was quite long, so we ended up shortening it up, and it wasn't too much of a problem. This is a prototype we did up for Ilos. This is almost like a set we built. We textured it, put in fog, just placed a couple characters, just to kind of get an idea of the lighting we wanted. We were really happy with this look. We thought it was going to be the final look for Ilos. As we started to build it, test it, a lot of issues kind of came up just with the plants. It was running slow because of the amount of vegetation in there, the punch throughs and so on. A lot of leaves that would intersect with the character was getting annoying. It was hard to see the enemies. So we had to start to think of some other ideas for this area. This is just another prototype model, still with us thinking that we were going to do a real jungle feel to it. Just playing around with maybe the ground being a bit darker, maybe more rotting leaves. Really trying to decide what kind of fog we wanted in there. This is the archives. And you can see some of the structures that made it to the final game. Those vents that almost are pulled out, kind of a unique Prothean shape there. That curved wall off to the left with these large holes that cast light down on the area. Originally the designers wanted it all completely sealed off like you were in a cave, but we were going to have a hard time lighting it because nothing was powered up at that point. What would actually give it light so we can make you see? We didn't have any lights on a rover at this time. So we ended up moving those holes up on the left actually to more ceiling lights, casting light down through all the roots and so on. This is just a view in max of the trench. It's partly textured, just starting to get some of the terrain in rough. A lot of that you're not going to see because you actually be down in the trench, but some of the elements that ended up to the final game, like pretty well the look of the trench made it to the final one. Those structures that went across casted nice shadows down on the water just to break it up a bit. This is just another early view in max of the actual level, the trench run, some early versions of the textures, which we ended up modifying a bit to the new look. We'd added vegetation and so on. We're just playing around with the water, figuring out ways to make it quicker, look better, and so on. Another view of the trench. We wanted this water kind of cascading down almost like a canal, like a spillway. You were to be stuck in one of those driving along. A lot of enemies around here at this time. Maybe they would jump off the pillars. I mean, these are just things you think of as you build a level, and what makes it the final game is usually pretty close, but some things need to change. This is an area, I think this is an opening area of the game. Actually, yeah, if you see the bottom left, that's where the rover drops in and you see those structures. That's where you walk through. So you can see all the vegetation at this point. There were going to be waterfalls off to the left. Down below, there was going to be this kind of swamp feel to it, reeds. You're trudging through knee-deep water. We ended up modifying that quite a bit. The basic layout of the level stayed the same. We just retextured it, removed a lot of vegetation for performance reason, and so you could actually see the enemies. This is an early view of the archives. At this point we had it quite open to the sky. You can see the leaves, the trees up there, the light cascading down. Nice mossy feel to it. We were actually quite happy with this. You would drive down through this. This is pretty well the final structure. Not much change in this to the final game. We just ended up retexturing and lighting it, but we were pretty happy with the look of this at that point. Again, this is the opening. As you come out of the archives, you bounce around on this flat structure and then you drive down into the trench run for your final run towards the mass relay. Again, it still had all the vegetation in there, an old skybox. This is our green trench run. Beautiful green, nice sky, had a real kind of jungle feel to it, swampy water, rocks in there, and we thought this thing was pretty well final. This is another view of that area. One thing to help break up the trench run, we almost built these tunnels in through here with larger structures that kind of came over, kind of darkened up. This would be a combat area. Instead of this long trench all the time, you can kind of come. We were actually going to make it so there was different doorways through here you had to try and open and figure out how to get your vehicle through there, but we ended up just simplifying it up quite a bit and keeping the trench run pretty simple. This is pretty well the final area that we thought. I mean, this is the one that we had in E3. It has all the vegetation. This has the sky that we wanted, the look of the fog. We were probably just going to add some sound effects of rain, and we thought we were done. I mean, this one was in the bag and could work on the next planet. And then we changed it, and when we changed it, we changed it. So one thing to solve the problem with the vegetation was to get rid of it, and we did. We pulled most of the trees. We just threw in branches. These small little plants that wouldn't get in your way. You could see the enemy a lot more, and we went with more of an alien feel. Deep orange. I mean, we looked at the artist Bekzinski. He's a Polish artist, but he did these fascinating paintings with this almost coral rock structure moving over these figures and churches and so on. And we use that for a bit of influence on this. So you can actually see some of the roots we actually left. We just kind of retextured them. We put a new texture on the ground. It's kind of almost looks like a coral kind of feel to it, this rock that would grow over all the protein structures. This is actual level art. This is with the new textures put on there, some of the trees. You can see those turquoise lights. Those were Geth lights we kind of put in there to help guide you through the area. Some people were getting lost. So we need some kind of a focal point to carry you through if you ever get lost. Look for those blue lights, and just to introduce another color. We were also playing around with maybe a bit of a blue fog at that time in the bottom left corner. This is another view of that area. This is one of those Geth lights, nice blue lighting up, the deep orange in the background, kind of a real alien feel, like this thing had been almost, it's baking out of the sun, like this Holocaust had happened there and so on, just to really tie into the story of the Protheans. This is what the archives used to look like until we made a quick color change. We did have it this deep blue. You're supposed to be deep underground at this point, but we ended up pretty well leaving everything as is, but just changing the lighting to the orange lighting that made it to the final game. The Prothean pods are those just structures off to the left and right with the lights on them. Some are maybe open, like as they start to get shut down or die, they would get shot out. Some of them were saved, other ones ended up dying. So this is one of the early concepts for Noveria. This is it's our ice planet. I mean, every science fiction game has to have an ice planet, and this is our ice planet. So this is the concept of one of the stations on Noveria, the main lab. Just a large structure in the middle of the mountains, kind of buried into the side of the hills. This is another view of the base, just a soldier out patrolling. The large tower structures in the background there, the mountains out in the distance. Not much to this. Originally, Noveria is supposed to, we were planning around with the idea that maybe the lower part of the base was in the Alpine section, the lower Greenlands, and as you moved up towards the top of the base, it'd be all snow-covered, buried in the clouds. This is a quick drawing of a floor map for the area. We would do these up pretty quickly, show these to the designers, making sure all the elements they want in there. So they have specific areas they need to have, like we need a base, maybe a cafeteria, barracks, we need a large computer core in here, and we need to link these all together by a certain way. We need multiple levels and so on. So we draw these up, show them the designers, so we can start building the block levels. This is a map of the vehicle level. This got modified substantially from the beginning. This is one of the original ones. You're supposed to come out of the base, move your way up through the valley. You're going to go across a dam. You were going to work your way across this frozen lake. There was going to be all these gatehouses you had to open up. We ended up scrapping a lot of that and then just making it pretty well a road along the side of a mountain with a few tunnels. It was just getting way too complicated for what we could do. These are some quick sketches of one of the earlier versions of the base. This was going to be buried in the mountain. That one, the top one in the middle, was going to be the Rachni chamber. That one got modified quite a bit from that, and then the one on the top right, some of the bridge structures, some of the elevation, and how maybe some of the rooms would look in this area. So once we get a drawing of the layout of the area, we'll go to a block level. This was a block level that was built for Noveria. This one probably took the artist about maybe a week to build. We can run around this area, get a good idea about the size, how the layout works. Is it getting too complicated? How are our views working? Can we see too much of the level? We have some streaming problems. Is there too much running around between the rooms? This is what we all decided this time before we even started to texture it or light it. This is the hangar for Noveria. At this point, we were thinking, as I mentioned earlier, that it was going to be lower down in the valley. There was going to be pine trees. You could see the mountains up in the distance. It almost had this feeling you're in Switzerland or Austria. So you'd pull into this area, it'd be quite lush. You'd get out of the walkway and move your way in through the base. The problem with this was we tried to do this and it ended up like you were on two different planets. People kind of getting confused, like, why is it green down here and it's snowy up at the top? Why don't we just make it snowy on the whole planet to keep it consistent? And that's what we ended up doing. This is a quick drawing over top of an actual block level, just to kind of get our head around how the structure went up above. When you get into the level, after you get out of the hangar, you move into this large hub. You can actually see it snowing outside. If you look up through the windows, you see the structure kind of above it, stepping up the side of the mountain. And this is just a drawing to show the level artist what our idea was at. This is the garage for Novaria when you get into your vehicle. It shows some of the beams, some of the walkways around in there. This is where you get in the rover. We ended up having to move the rover outside of here because if you jumped into it, you could drive around and get stuck in all these areas. You could just cause total chaos. So we moved it further out and pretty well left the hangar, the garage after that. This is a concept done up for part of Novaria. These were these tubes that we were trying to build later on in the area. This is where the arachnids were going to come crawling out after you. This is a concept of maybe how these capsules would put together, almost like a gerbil cage as you ran through the cylinders, got underneath one of these capsules. Would be a room. Arachnid would pour into these and you'd have to move to the next one. This one got pretty elaborate and we had to simplify it up quite a bit. This is some drawings of maybe how some of the wall sections looked on Novaria, how the beams, maybe how the windows were built, what the frames would look like. Just some ideas for the level artist to take and build his area from there. This is a drawing of the main computer core, Mira, how the beams, again, are also laid out for the rooms, how the actual computer's working. We ended up modifying this one substantially again we had to use a lot of existing materials. We couldn't spend the time in it that it required to make it look like this. It was just getting too complicated. This is another version of some ideas. You can actually see the block level up in the top left. The artist has done some work on it in the bottom right. There's supposed to be some pipes you were going underneath to get into these areas. You're going to be outside for quite a ways. Get inside, move around some of the interiors, come back outside, and so on. So as we decide what we want in the levels, we'll get drawings done up of a detailed version of these. We'll hand it off to the level artist and he can build those. Before we do that, we decide if we actually want to use this stuff. Is it getting too complicated? Can we make it simpler? So this is an example of the pipe that goes around through the out part of the level. This looks really good. I mean, this would have been a really fun area as you walked around beside the pipe. Could have been a lot of combat in this area. But just the time invested to build it. Can we do it with something else? Is it going to be that important that we need it? If we do need it, we'll build it. If we can do it with something else, we will. This is the Arachnid Queen chamber. She was supposed to be in that tube, and then when you let her out, the tube moves up that ramp, clicks up onto that next section, and she was supposed to leave out through that tube. Again, we had to modify this. It was getting complicated. We adjusted the floor, put more levels into it. Originally that was supposed to be an ice floor, it was all going to be snow and so on, but we really had to build it out of a lot of existing pieces to get it done. We'll also get the concept artist to do color versions of maybe what some of the rooms are going to look like. This is actually a version of the room we never used. It looks like more of a rounder room. That actual structure there in the top, that beam, we ended up making a detail mesh of that and using it throughout the level. So this beam looks like it connects to like a power generator. I think you were supposed to turn a switch on it to power up the station. This is a concept of how the hallways would look. Hallways are very important in the games. It seems like we're endlessly in hallways. You know, they link up all the rooms. You need them. You can make them longer in case you have to do something with streaming load. It's just something you always need. And this is a drawing of maybe how the ice would look on the outside, a bit of glass. So it always felt like you were on this ice world. Nice cool blue coming in throughout that floor. That hole in the floor was supposed to be where the arachnid would pour through. So if we built that, we would make that a detail mesh so we could easily move it throughout the level. We ended up changing that to be vents. It just worked out easier than trying to build all these holes in the floor. This is an early concept for the reactor. It would have been really nice to build this, but again, it was just way beyond what we could do for the amount of time. Mass Effect is a huge game. We have tons of levels, and we just really have to be very careful with what we try and tackle. We're supposed to go in here, powered up. I mean, we're going to go to multiple levels. This is a massive amount of work, but it would have looked amazing, but we really had to adjust what we were trying to do. So this is an outdoor prototype of that area in the game where you were outside. You can see that pipe off to the left, these metal platforms on the ground that you would kind of walk through. Like people laid them down just so you could walk on them easier on the snow. That's all this was. We ended up having to modify this quite a bit, and this view was cut from the game. So this is actually the main reactor core in the game. It changed quite a bit from the concept, but the level artist did a really good job of building this. It's got a lot of the same materials. It's got a lot of the hallway sections that we can reuse. We just opened it up a lot more. This was just a painting quickly over top of part of that level just to show how the lighting would look. What we sometimes do is as a level artist build it, they might need some help in lighting, like where are some of the lights coming from. So we'll decide where spotlights are, maybe some of the colors. We can quickly do this in Photoshop to give them a really good idea of what they need to do. Lighting's complex now, it's very time consuming doing it, so you don't want to make too many changes. This is a concept of the vehicle section of Novaria. This is as you come up to one of the bridges. It's supposed to be a blowing storm out there, blizzard, you can't see anything. So we just had these snow sheds almost. If you ever drive up a highway in the mountains, they build these sheds where there's a lot of avalanche areas. That's what this is. Maybe just some orange lights to give some nice contrast in there, kind of draw your eye to it. So as we did with a lot of the other levels, we built small little prototype sections. Texture artist built this one. He built this ice texture. Looks really good. So what he did was just build a small little diorama, put some guys in there, lit it, put some cool fog in there. We can look at it and go, yeah, that looks amazing. That's the look we want. Let's carry it throughout the level. What he also did was build some of our hallways, door sections. We look at a lot of reference from books. We looked at Sid Mead, the Final Fantasy movie, Red Planet, Mission to Mars. We looked at we looked at Solaris, just as much reference as we could possibly get. We looked at modern architecture for materials. So we kind of referenced a lot of things for that. Just the metal on the walls we liked, the kind of cushion material on the doors kind of gave us a really good feeling. And this we were able to take throughout the level. This was the main part of ice. This is what we could take throughout the area and make it really unique to Novaria. So Novaria has this train you have to get into to go from level to level, and of course, how much time are you going to spend in it? Is it going to require a lot of concepting? So we gave this to one of the artists. He built this train up, did a great job on it, lit it, used a lot of reusable materials in there. So he built it, showed us in a scene. That's what we used for the train. This is another view of some of the hallways, how the windows would look, some of the railings, the floor materials. This is all textured up, lighting for it. So what you can do is really just link these all together, build all the hallways you need, almost build rooms off these by these sections. Gives it this nice capsule feel with the ice on the outside. It turned out really well. This is an early version of the vehicle level. We were playing around with how bright we wanted it. Did we want it quite dark during a blizzard, or did we want it more during the daytime? So this was just kind of figuring out the lighting with kind of some of the rough terrain built into it. So Novaria went through a lot of changes like a lot of the other planets did. This was the main station. When you fly in, you come out, you go to this is the main part of the station that's built into the mountain. Originally we wanted to have a lot of woods in there, some stainless steel, the green rolling hills on the outside, and it just wasn't working. So we ended up bringing the snow all the way down to this point, blue lighting outside, more concrete, just some warm lighting, these pot lights so that the level artists could really figure out where the lighting was coming from. This was a huge improvement from what we had before, and the level artists did a really good job of building this. So this is an early concept for Virmire. At this point we were thinking Virmire was this tropical paradise, more of a vacation planet. Looked at a lot of areas in Thailand, that James Bond movie, The Man with a Golden Gun. Tall rock formations with these structures built into them, these floating platforms above this nice turquoise tropical water. There's a flying car over there on the left where people would come in, enjoy themselves, and so on. Then the designers told us that it was actually going to be an evil base. So as you might well know, we had to go back to the drawing board on a lot of these. This is actually the map for the vehicle level. You start off at the top right, work your way down through these shallow pools of water, going over these sandbars, getting to these gatehouses, forces you to get out of the vehicle, have some combat, open up the next level. You're supposed to destroy some towers and so on. There's going to be some areas where you looked out over the ocean. These kind of dams are built up with these breakwater areas. This is a very early block level for Virmire. This is the base. This is the Krogan breeding grounds. So this is just a platform. Built this very quickly. Designers run around. We look at it, decide, yeah, this is what we want. Is this the right length? Does the areas feel big enough? Is it too big? And so on. This is another quick block level. Starting to get a bit of the layout in here. We have these platforms. Those kind of balls down the front represent the rocks. This is actually an old armor we had in the game that one of the characters is wearing. We ended up changing that quite a bit. So after we get the block level roughed in, we'll get one of the concept artists to kind of take that, paint over parts of it, and kind of really decide what we're going to do with this level. How are we going to make this thing unique? What are going to be some of the structures that we can carry throughout the area, make it iconic, so we can build a few of them and not have to try and build every unique piece. It's just a nice, good drawing of how you walk along, how you get the view over the ocean and some of the structures that we're trying to build. This is another view of the base. These curved walls, a lot of openings. Problem with this is it's a bit of a nightmare to build. All these unique curved areas made it very complex. As you got back and looked out over the base, it made it very heavy for streaming load. So these are things that we find out now that we can change as we're building the level. This is a concept of some of the holding cells. This is where you find the Solarians and you end up blasting a bunch of them if you choose to. So this is a concept of how the doors would look. We wanted some glass in there, and then we could actually use these for multiple areas in the cells. I think the cells appear 2 places in a level. There's some really nice detail in these areas. You get a real feel for what the materials are, where the lighting's coming from, which is very important for these concepts, and this does it really well. This is Saren's room where he communicates with Sovereign. You go up to the level, you go into here, you find the Prothean beacon, and then you go up, and then you're supposed to talk to Sovereign here. This was all done quite early. It was all, with these computer panels around. We weren't really sure how Sovereign was going to appear at this point, but this was just kind of having a view out over the level with these kind of computer graphics, holograms over top of the windows. This is a painting over the block level. This actually made it pretty far in the game. This is pretty close to what the final look is like. I mean, we have the breakwater, we have the walking up across the platform, we have the giant gun turret at the top. We ended up modifying this turret quite a bit. We just took the sniper rifle and scaled it up and then put a few shields on it, and it worked out quite well. This is the Krogan breeding grounds. This looks down into the actual capsules that the Krogans are bred in. It has the platform, some of the mechanical arms. It's starting to get some of those sail structures that we incorporated throughout the level up on the top right. Storm clouds off in the distance. This is how we changed the level to make it a bit more menacing. Really nice lighting in this concept, really well done. Again, this is another concept trying to detail out some of those sails, the gun in the background, maybe even how some of the railings are. We had to modify these in the final game. They were bad for cover, and usually when you crouch you always hit the one railing. Just some of the things you find out as you're playing through the game. This is the concept for where you drop off the bomb. There's this water area, these structures on the left. We actually built those detail meshes. You can see those kind of curved areas with the lights on top. We had to square off the bottom a bit more because of the cover. But it was going to be this water area where it kind of floods in, water flows down into this kind of cylinder, and then the structure here was supposed to draw you in. You leave the bomb there and you blow the hell out of the whole base. So this is the level artist. He's taken the concepts, and this is a really early start at building a level. He's taken the terrain, tried to pull it up to what we wanted. He's got a bit of the water in there. And so we're starting to get what we want. This is probably first little while of building the level. We decided that the terrain actually couldn't do what we wanted to, so we actually had to use static mesh for a lot of the walls. We textured them up to look like the rock we wanted. We needed it quite vertical, cut them in at the bottom where it looks like the water is worn away at it. So we're starting to get to some of the materials in there, the water, how the cliffs would look, maybe an early version of the sky. This is a later view of that area. Starting to get some palm trees in there, a bit more lush. We're also off to the right, we darkened it up quite a bit. On the vehicle level, we kind of wanted this barrier that it looked like it went into deeper water, so as you drove in there, the vehicle would plunge down and you would die. So it was kind of a natural barrier that would force you to kind of stay on the path to go around all these structures. There's a couple of models of the beetle in there that we used in this level earlier on. We ended up changing them to a different ambient creature. So this is starting to texture up the level. We got some of the concrete materials on here. We're starting to get the railings. Where do we want to put certain materials? Where do we want to put the metal? Where do we want to put the concrete? And just going through the level as step by step. This is the start of the Krogan breeding grounds. You saw the concept earlier. That arm was just built up. We ended up not using that one. Some of the railings actually made it to the final game. There's the start of the sails to get a nice fabric, soften up all the concrete. The Krogan, this is an early concept for the Krogan tubes. We just built a quick block model for those, just so we get an idea of where they go and kind of look of it. We ended up doing a detail mesh of that later on. So this is a top-down view of the actual breeding grounds. There's the 2 turrets. One gets destroyed where you actually fight Saren, and then the trenches where the Krogan breeding areas are. So this is how big these areas are. This is like one chunk, and then they split it up into streaming load areas. This is another view of the Krogan breeding grounds. You're up higher now, looking down again. Starting to get the sky in, texturing it up more, just keep chipping away, getting more and more detail in there, figuring out what's working and what isn't. This is another view of that area. We're starting to get the water in down below, and that structure that was concepted up with the hole, that's where the water pours down, you end up dropping a bomb. The Normandy also flies in that area. It's quite a big battle that takes place here. This is some detail of the wall. We were finding out that it was just starting to get too much concrete. It was just, even with the fabric and a lot of the other natural vegetation outside, it was just, we needed something else. So we added this material with a cube map, just a bit of a shine, helped out the area a lot. So detail meshes are pretty important to our game. We decide earlier on what we're going to make a detail mesh. We get the texture artist to build it, give it its own unique texture, spend quite a bit of time on them. Some of these can take up to 4 or 5 days to do. So this is a detail mesh of kind of this linkage joint with the wires that kind of come into this heavy concrete base we put throughout the level. Once you build these, you like to use them as much as possible in an area. This is the detail mesh of the door. Nice big solid metal door. Looked really good. Nice material on there. It definitely felt like it was metal. So as I was talking about earlier, the Krogan breeding grounds, we built, we had a concept of the actual cylinders, the tubes, and then we did a quick just block model in the levels. Then we had our artist do a detailed mesh of the actual breeding ground cylinders. These turned out really good as well. We actually used them in different parts of the level, just kind of turned them on a side. So these aren't quite complete yet, but they're getting quite close to it. This is another detail mesh of that structure we have in the level. We had to square off the bottom corners for the final game, but you can see the nice material. Looks like it's kind of a concrete with a bit of paint on it, chipped away. The more time you spend on these, the better they get, and this one was looking really well, good. So this is pretty well the end of Viermeyer. This is a view off one of the gatehouses. The textures are complete. This is pretty well the final look of the area. We have all the vegetation. We have our structures the way we want. We can see some of these detail meshes, those wire clips down at the lower right. Those other kind of structures that were built are also down the lower right. So we can use these throughout just to add a bit more detail to certain areas. We put those barriers off on the walls just for cover. So as we play through the game, we think we might need more cover here and there. We'll add some metal here. We can't always do it with placeables. And this is the walkways. This is the final look for the area. We have waterfalls pouring down in the background. Very lush area, looks amazing. Did a really good job on this area. We have those raised elevated platforms that were actually originally concepted up as a version where it was this tropical paradise. Now it becomes this turning point in the game. I mean, this is where you decide whether you want to keep Rex or not. You talk to Sovereign, you find out where Ilos is. It's just a pivotal point in the game, and turned out really well, this whole area.